Mohammed was frequently engaged in hostilities with the Venetians as well as with the Genoese. The archipelago and the coast of Greece were generally the scenes of these wars, in the course of which the Sultan obtained possession of Euboea, Lesbos, Lemnos, and Kefalonia, and other islands. The conquest of the Euboea was marked by base, treachery, and cruelty on the part of the Sultan, and signalized by the pure rage of a Christian heroine. The Venetian commander Paul Erizzo, after a long and brave defense, surrendered the citadel on condition of the Sultan pledging his word for the safety of all within it. Mohammed signed the capitulation, and when the garrison had marched out and laid down their arms, he put all of them except the Greeks to death with the cruelest tortures. Paul Erizzo was sawn in two by his orders. The daughter of the Venetian general, the young and fair Anne Erizzo, was dragged to the Sultan's tent, but the Christian maiden preferred death to dishonor, and unmoved by either promise or threat, she was killed by the slaves of the angry tyrant. Towards the end of Muhammad's reign, Skanderbeg was completely overpowered by the Ottoman forces, and Albania and the district of Herzegovina were united with the Sultan's dominions. This conquest brought the Turkish arms into more extensive contact with the possessions of Venice along the eastern coast of the Adriatic. In 1477, a powerful Turkish army marched into the territory of Friuli at the northern extremity of the sea, and menaced Venice itself. The Venetians formed fortified camps at Gardina and Foglinia, and carried a line of entrenchments from the mouth of the Isonzo to Greece. But the Turks in the October of that year passed their lines and defeated their army. Omar Pasha, the Ottoman general, next passed the Taglimanto, a stream destined to become illustrious after warfare. The Turkish troops spread themselves without resistance over all the rich level country as far as the banks of the Piave, and the trembling senators of Venice saw from their palace roofs the northern horizon glow with the light of burning towns and villages. The Turks retired in November loaded with booty. Venice eagerly concluded a treaty of peace with the Sultan, which, according to one Italian historian, contained a stipulation which the Republic was to aid the Sultan if attacked with a fleet of 100 galleys, and the Sultan was in case of like necessity to send 100,000 Turkish cavalry against the enemies of Venice. The subjection of Italy was a project which Mohammed thought often obliged to delay, had never abandoned it. In 1418 he prepared to carry it into execution on a scale of military and naval preparation equal to the grandeur of the enterprise, and at the same time he resolved to quell the sole formidable enemy that yet remained near the heart of his dominions. The strong island of Rhodes was still in the possession of the Knights of the St. John of Jerusalem, who had established themselves there in 1311 and gallantly maintained their sovereignty of the island as an independent power for upwards of a century and a half. The renegades from the order had incited the Sultan to attack Rhodes by giving him plans of its fortifications and promising that it would be easily captured by force, which the Turks could employ against it. Mesih Pasha was sent to capture Rhodes in April in 1418 with a fleet of 116 galleys, a powerful army, and a large park of the heaviest artillery. The Ottoman Pasha effected a landing off the island, and after capturing some inferior posts, he formed his lines of siege against the city itself, which it built on the northern extremity of the isle. The Grand Master of the Knights, Peter Abusion, defended the city with indomitable fortitude and consummate skill, but it must have fallen had it not been for the ill-timed avarice or military rigor of the Turkish commander. After a long siege and many severe encounters, the Turks made a general assault on the 28th July 1418. Their artillery had opened a wide rent in the walls. Their numbers were ample. Their zeal was never more conspicuous. In spite of the gallantry of the Christian knights, the attacking columns had gained the crest of the breach, and the Ottoman standard was actually planted on the walls of Mesih Pasha. When Mesih Pasha ordered a proclamation to be made that pillage was forbidden, and that all the plunder of the place must be reserved for the Sultan. This announcement filled the Turkish army with disgust and disaffection. The soldiery, yet outside the town, refused to march into the support their comrades, who had won the breach, and there were borne back and driven in disorder from the city by a last desperate charge of the cavalry, who had marked the sudden wavering of their assailants. The siege was raised, and Rhodes rescued for half a century. On the same day, that the Turks advanced to their unsuccessful assault on Rhodes, the leader of their other great expedition, Ahmed Keduk, the conqueror of the Crimea, effected his disembarkation on the southern coast of Italy, where no Ottoman before him had placed his foot. He landed on the Apulian shore and marched against Otranto, which was then considered the key of Italy. His fleet cast anchor in the roads, and the city was promptly and fiercely assailed, both by sea and by land. The resistance of Otranto, so spirited, was brief. The place was stormed on the 11th August 1418. Out of a population of 22,000, the greater number were massacred without mercy, and the wretched survivors subjected to the worst atrocities of Turkish warfare. Mahomet was now master of a strong city and harbor, which secured an entrance for his armies into Italy. His arms had met reverses at Rhodes when he was absent, but he resolved to conduct the next enterprise in person. Early in the spring of 1481, the horsetails were planted on the Asiatic shore of the Bosporus to signal for a new campaign. But no one, save the Sultan himself, knew against which quarter the power of Turkey was now to be directed. His maxim was that secrecy in design and celerity in execution are the great elements of success in war. Once, when at the commencement of a campaign one of his chief officers asked with him what were the main objects of his operations, Mohammed answered sharply, "If a hair of my beard knew them, I would pluck it out and cast it into the fire." No one could tell what throne was menaced by the host that now gathered at the Sultan's bidding. But while the masters were yet incomplete, the expedition was arrested by the death of the Sultan, who expired suddenly in the midst of his army on the 3rd May 1481. Chapter 6. Institutes of Muhammad II, Turkish government, armies, tenures of land, institutions, education, the ulema, the raya, slavery, renegades, Turkish character, Turkish warfare. The personal character of Muhammad II has been already discussed. Nor would we willingly turn again into repulsive subject what be accomplished as a conqueror for the advancement of the Ottoman power has been made apparent in the narrative of his reign, but it would be injustice to pass over his political institutions, and we may conveniently take this occasion of surveying generally the internal organization of the Turkish Empire. From the time when Ottoman first killed his uncle in full council for contradicting his shames to the self-imposed limitations of the sultans during the last few years, there is no trace in the Turkish history of any civil constitutional restraint upon the will of the ruling sovereign. There is indeed a popular tradition among the Turks that the sultan has a right to put to death 7 men, and no more, in each day without any cause, save that it is his pleasure so to do. But even the elimination of arbitrary homicide, which this tradition imports, has never been rare. Abundant instances may be found in the reign of Selim I, of Amurath IV, Mohammed IV, and of Mohammed the Conqueror himself, where far greater numbers have been sacrificed without form the trial at the royal command. The title of Honikar, the manslayer, is or till lately has been one most commonly used by the subjects of the Sultan in speaking of their sovereign, not as conveying any censure of imputation of tyranny, but in simple acknowledgment of his absolute power of life or death. Only the person of the Mufti, the chief of the men of law, has been supposed to be inviolable and exception doubtful, even in theory, and unimportant in practice, as the Sultan could depose the refractory Mufti whenever he pleased, and the inviolability of the individual must case with the loss of office. The sovereign's power is absolute over property as well as over person, but the sultans have ever refrained from seizing property that has been consecrated to pious uses. Such an act would have been regarded as sacrilegious and seditious Mohammedans, and have been probably followed by an insurrection. Nor in practice has private property suffered in Turkey from royal rapacity except in the case of officers in the service of the government, whose wealth has always been subject to confiscation. All, all honors, commands, and dignities have been in the Sultan's absolute disposal to give or to take away as he pleases, and all his Mohammedan subjects are equal before him, none having any privilege of birth, either from family or from place or nativity, one over the other. See von Hammer books 1834 and supplement the son Tableau General Empire Ottoman. See von Hammer book 3053 in Thronton, account of the Turkish Empire. The number of the sultans privileged to slay is 15. State of the Ottoman Empire, written at the close of the 17th century, says the Grand Signior can never be deposed or made accountable for any for his crimes, while he destroys causelessly of his subjects under the number of 8,000 a day. The same writer states that deeds by the Sultan's hand or by his order was, if submitted to without resistance or murmur, considered to give a title to eternal felicity.